All right, welcome everybody to How to Write Your VFA Essay and a Day in the Life of a VFA Fellow. To kick things off, we're going to go with some introductions. My name is Jacob Robinson. I'm a 2014 VFA alum. I joined the VFA team in 2018, and I am on the recruitment team. Next up, we have Manisha. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Manisha. I joined the VFA Fellowship in 2018 in Cleveland. I work at a company called Groupmatics as their lead product designer. And yeah, excited to talk to you all today.
And I'm Alvaro Ortega. I'm a 2019 Birmingham Fellow, originally from Miami, and I most recently was the Director of Communications and Community Engagement at Opportunity Alabama, a small startup nonprofit based out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Lastly.
Hi everyone, my name is Riel Snorton. I'm a Senior Talent Associate here at Venture for America.
Appreciate all of you all volunteering your time for this webinar. And this webinar is going to have 3 parts today that we're going to get through in the next 50 minutes. We'll start off with what is Venture for America, kind of VFA 101. We'll then do a bit of Q&A with Manisha and Alvaro, and then we'll conclude answering your questions around 5:55 so that we can do a little bit of housekeeping. That's 5:55 Eastern. So to kick things off, what is Venture for America? Venture for America is a nonprofit. Nonprofits often have missions, and we care about our mission, so I'm going to read it to you all. Venture for America is creating economic opportunity in American cities by mobilizing the next generation of entrepreneurs. That's everybody on this call, and equipping them with the skills and resources they need to create jobs. And we can get into what those skills and resources are throughout this presentation. If this is the first time you're seeing this mission, my first recommendation for you is to reflect on the mission. What resonates with you about it? What doesn't resonate with you about it? What questions do you have? When writing your essay, starting with how you feel about our mission is an excellent place to start. Now, we work in 14 cities. Let's see if the audience knows who they are. Let's jump in that chat. If you were to become a VFA fellow, what would be some of the cities that you would consider moving to? Oh, Kansas City, New Orleans, people trying to come hang out in Ohio with me. Detroit. Nice work, y'all. I'm seeing a couple on here that are not VFA cities, but here are the 14 cities. As you can see, they're primarily in the East Coast, the Midwest, and the Southeast. Now, why do we work in these cities? Here's a tip for you with your essay. Talk about why you're excited about these cities. Why would you want to move to this city rather than San Francisco, New York City, Austin, perhaps? When people think startups, the last 3 cities that I mentioned are often what come to mind. We have decided to connect our fellows with startups in these cities for a couple of reasons. One, there are entrepreneurs in these cities that are solving real problems. However, a challenge that they face is it's hard to come to your school, to have a webinar, to connect with you all one-on-one and recruit you to work at a startup in Kansas City, in Charlotte, in Cleveland, in San Antonio. That's where VFA comes in. We're the in-between you and that startup. And we propose that you go and work at that startup if one day you would like to become a founder, like Alvaro, or 2, one day you would like to become a leader at your startup, like Manisha, and they'll be talking to you all today about how they're on a pathway to leadership and becoming founders on their own. So that is our value proposition to you all. Go and apprentice under an experienced entrepreneur for 2 years before you become a leader, before you become a founder. Our application process has 4 parts. You all already knocked out the activities portion. You told us who you are, you sent us your resume, and you talked about the impact you all made in 3 activities. We are here today to talk about the online essay. You all have an essay that's due next Monday, where you're going to talk about why you want to be a VFA fellow, as well as start to pitch yourself in terms of what job at a startup you can fulfill. And lastly, talk about a VFA city that you're interested in and why. Should you progress to the next round, it'll be a video interview. It could be with a VFA team member like me or Riel. It could be with an alum as well as a fellow like Manisha and Alvaro. I've got a question here related to the essay. Should we mention which areas we are interested in? Great question. I would recommend that you pick one primary role that you're interested in. Talk about how you are qualified to work in that one role. And if you have secondary or tertiary roles that you're passionate about and qualified for, you can submit those towards the bottom of the essay. Great question, Jillian. And someone asked if we are going to get a recording of this webinar. You will. Everybody who has made it to this round will receive a question tomorrow. I've got a couple more questions in here. Let's keep it going with the presentation, and we're going to compile those at the end just to stay on track. Last step is selection day. You all will be eligible to attend our selection day. Sorry, not October the 2nd, but in November or December. And it is a virtual selection day. All of our selection days for the class of 2021 will be virtual due to the pandemic. And we'll dig a little bit more in terms of what we are looking for in our essay. So a quick overview about VFA at a glance. And when thinking about your essay, it'd be a good thing to shout out some of these things to show that you're programmatically aligned. So after you become a fellow, we're going to help you prepare for a process called match. You'll prepare through a process called onboarding, where you're going to learn how to maximize the fellowship, as well as how to be an excellent job seeker amidst the pandemic. Match is a job portal. Think about it as VFA's private LinkedIn. There will be more than 250 company partners, startups, across our 14 cities that are looking to connect with you. You can pitch these companies, the companies can pitch you, and once there's a mutual match, a regular job process begins. Next summer, you'll attend a month-long training. This training will either be in person in Detroit, Michigan, or virtual. The class of 2020 was our first virtual class that had a virtual training camp. Manisha, Alvaro, they attended training camp in person in Detroit. Formerly, training camp is an opportunity for you to develop an entrepreneurial mindset and to do so through the development of both hard skill training and soft skill training. But any fellow will tell you their favorite part of training camp was getting to know the other fellows in their class. And you'll hear us talk quite a bit about community today. Once training camp concludes at the end of July, in the month of August, September, you'll likely transition to your city where you'll begin living and working in a VFA city at a startup that you connected with via match before training camp. And this is the core of the fellowship. Learning on the job, apprenticing under an experienced entrepreneur. And we have programming that you can participate in virtually and in your city during your fellowship. After your fellowship, you can continue working at your startup. You can start a company, or you can join a larger tech company, whether that is in a VFA city or not. Some of our fellows are going to grad school. I'm a firm believer in that a VFA alum can go and do whatever they want. We can offer some statistics on what fellows and alums are doing after their fellowship. Manisha and Alvaro can also talk to you about what they're thinking to do after their fellowship. So once again, when writing your essay, why VFA, talking about one of these 4 things is an excellent way to show that you did your homework, right? It's sunny where I am right now. You could be outside, but you decided to come to this webinar to learn about VFA and to learn about how you can put forth your best essay. These 4 opportunities are a great place to start. Lastly, before we start asking some questions to our panelists, let's talk about some tips. So I'm going to go into the 3 criteria that we look for in our application process. The first is mission and programmatic alignment, right? I read our mission at the start of this webinar. I described our program to you. Explicitly, you should talk about why you want to live in a VFA city. If you talk about moving to California, you're probably not going to move to the next round. The majority of our startups are for-profit companies. And I'm going to talk to you about how to balance your social sector interests while working at a for-profit company. So a lot of us want to make an impact in our community. VFA is a nonprofit, but the companies that we work with traditionally are not nonprofits. They're not all social entrepreneurial. The vast majority are solving a problem and doing it in a for-profit way. So if you have the desire to make an impact in your community, to start a nonprofit one day, that is phenomenal, and you and I are in the same club. However, VFA will likely connect you with a for-profit company, and you need to be able to articulate how working at a for-profit company will help you in your entrepreneurial journey. Furthermore, there are 2 programmatic outcomes that our program produces. One is becoming a leader at a startup. The other is becoming a founder. If you can articulate why you want to become a startup leader and or a founder, and how VFA can be a stepping stone to that outcome, we call that mission alignment. So the whole point of this webinar is to give you all the keys. Write your essay towards being mission aligned and programmatically aligned, or explain why not. Next, it's not just about getting into VFA. You have to be able to do work at a startup. And we categorize this as an ability to contribute. It is not a requirement to have worked at a startup before becoming a VFA fellow. It's not a requirement to be an entrepreneur before being a VFA fellow. And these would be great questions to ask Alvaro and Manisha. What is a requirement is that you can articulate how you can make an impact at a startup. Throughout our application process, we are looking for you to convince us that if we put you in front of an entrepreneur, they are going to want to hire you. So, whether it is a campus club that you are a leader of, a volunteer organization in your community, a club or an initiative that you started, perhaps an internship, an on-campus job, a school project. We want to learn where you started and where you ended. Were these organizations and groups better because you were there? And a very objective way to do so is to talk about numbers. For example, this is how I compared to my peers when I was in this internship. When I was the leader of this club, we had 10 people. By the time I left, we had 30 people. That's a very objective way to show your impact. When I read a resume, I look for names, things that I understand so I can kind of envision you. And then I look for numbers so that I can understand in an objective way that you've made an impact. Lastly, we're looking for some people that have some character. We're looking for some stories where you've demonstrated resilience, integrity, being positive despite having to work remote in your internship, right? Something getting in your way, having remote classes, right? You can guarantee that startup life is going to be very similar to pandemic life, up and down. How are you going to respond? And remain flexible. Throughout your essays, think about how you can articulate your story through these 3 criteria. And if I ever speak with a VFA candidate, I always recommend that you tell a story. Do not submit a cover letter response to these essays. No one's going to remember that. Tell your story and people will remember. And do so alongside some of the tips that we've offered today. That's it for me. I'm 1 minute over 5:21 Eastern. Let's kick it to our panelists. Let's talk with Manisha and Alvaro. And I've got a couple of questions that we have already sent Manisha and Alvaro that we're going to run through to kind of get the juices flowing, get on the same page about their journeys. And then around 5:40 Eastern, we're going to get to y'all's questions. So, Alvaro, let's start with you. Tell us your VFA story. Why did you decide to join VFA after college?
Prior to joining VFA, I had spent all my internships working in government. And for me, working in the public sector meant a lot because I could directly create the systems and environments for people to create change and create solutions to the issues around them. I could help craft legislation that allowed people allow business permits for people to be able to create those solutions to the issues. And around my last internship, I realized that I actually wanted to be part of the people creating the solutions, because as great as it was to create these environments where people could create solutions, I wanted to have a direct role in that because I was seeing a lot of people having fun and creating solutions based on legislation that I had worked on. So for me, that vision to create change and create a direct impact for like the lives of residents of the cities that I cared about was still there, but I felt that I could best do it from the private sector. And that was happening right around the time that I found out about VFA. And I just thought those two things just aligned perfectly.
Manisha, how about you?
Yeah, I think my story is similar in some ways. So when I graduated college, I actually wanted to become a full-time musician and thought very hard about going that route. But one of the biggest things about being a musician is you're basically a business owner. And there are a lot of things that I was not prepared for. And one route that I definitely didn't want to take was trying to work my way up through the very bureaucratic entertainment industry. Venture for America, I think, was both a great value fit and also a great growth fit. I really wanted to work in an environment where I felt like I could be an owner and learn while I was on the job. But I think what made the VFA fellowship particularly a good fit was also just like how, oh my God, the TV just turned on by itself. But was really just to make sure that I was working like alongside people who shared my values of like resilience and positivity, etc. So, yeah.
Thank you both for sharing a little bit about your story. Looks like Manisha might have a ghost over there with her. And talk to us about your day-to-day life as a fellow. And if you could, define which industry you work in. Just define what problem your company is looking to solve. And when you offer your role, define your role as well, because our candidates, our applicants, they are required to talk about role in industry, and they might not have those fundamentals down. So let's give them some examples. Let's start with you, Manisha. Day in the life.
Yeah. I might have missed something because I'm still jarred from the TV turning on. So tell me if I missed anything. But I can start by explaining my job and then going into my day-to-day. So I work at a company called Groupmatics, and we are in the sports industry. We do sports ticketing, and for live events, that is obviously not a thing right now. I, as a product designer, do a few things. Number one, I help our company understand who our users are, so that user research can take the form of interviews. It can also take the form of collecting data when they visit our websites. I work with our product team to figure out what is like the best solution to what we observe are the problems that we're seeing, not necessarily what clients tell us are issues, because the two are very different. And then the final aspect of my job is tactical design. So I put together what are called high fidelity prototypes, which are basically mock-ups that look very similar to what someone would see on a website. And that's, engineers use that as a guide to eventually build out what the product will eventually look like. So I think the one thing that I really love about my job is that it's very cross-functional. So my day is working with a bunch of different organizations or departments in my company. The departments is kind of a stretch because my company is only like 12 to 15 people. So I start my day on a daily stand-up, and that'll include like the product team and the engineering team and myself and my boss, who's another designer. And we basically run through any roadblocks that we're having. It's only a 15-minute meeting, and that's because like we really need to keep things fast-paced because there's normally a lot to get done, especially at my company where we're changing our entire business model now that we have to accommodate like getting revenue from a different portion. And because my specific role is very generative in nature, I actually spend a really big chunk of my day heads down. Like I have like do not schedule like blocks on my calendar because I have to get a lot of tactical design work done. So I think that one thing that I've really learned is basically being able to manage my schedule and tell people when they can meet with me and when they can't. And then I normally save like the end of the day for meetings if I need to talk to like our product managers or review something by engineering to make sure my designs are realistic. So yeah, I'd say that's specifically my day-to-day in my job.
Appreciate you breaking that down. And let's I want to flush it out a little bit. So you're based in Cleveland. Groupmatics works in the sports industry. Other examples of industry might be food, telecommunications, K-12 education. You're working in sports. And as far as your role goes, you're not necessarily technical or non-technical. You're kind of in between. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that there are some aspects of my job that require coding, but you could definitely be a product designer without knowing how to code. And when I was hired, I had no design experience. My company took a chance on me, and because they thought that they just like liked the way I thought. And then they taught me everything that I know pretty much up until where I am now. But yeah, that's correct. It's like kind of a hybrid between a technical and non-technical role.
Love that. And we're going to flush this out a little bit more before kicking it to Alvaro. So I see some questions here about role, examples of roles, sales, software engineering, marketing. When thinking about roles, traditionally you have technical roles and you have non-technical roles. All right, so technical roles, you kind of had to have had some like education, practice, on the job experience in order to know how to code, in order to know how to be an accountant or work in finance. It's unlikely that the startup is going to be able to train you if you don't have like some foundational skills. Now, with non-technical roles, a lot of times we can say, hey, I did something that helps me think like a salesperson, helps me think like a product manager, like Manisha is saying. And so, Manisha, chew on this. You talked about how you thought. We're going to go to Alvaro, but I want to come back to you in terms of like, if someone wanted to be a product manager, what would be some experiences that they could express to like help the employer think about how they think and like demonstrate that they're qualified? Alvaro, back to you, bro. Day in the life.
So my VFA company was a startup nonprofit that focused on creating economic development in the state of Alabama. So although I was localized in Birmingham, a lot of my job was driving around all over Alabama, going to rural parts, because my role was primarily community engagement, which meant meeting with local stakeholders and local economic developers, local public sector people. But in that, because it was such a small company and because we worked with so many different types of people, I also built my WordPress website. I handled social media. I did graphic design. I did business development. I tried finding systems that made us more productive, like Notion and Slack. So I got us on Slack because we had used that during VFA training camp. So I was able, because we were a 3-person team, I was able to do a lot, which is kind of, although I was looking for a different type of role at a different type of company, I felt that within this company, I could do a lot of the stuff that I wanted to do and more, because I wasn't dead set on what I wanted to do. And it also allowed me to better envision the skills that I had to offer. So because I had come from government, it was hard for me to think of, well, what skills do I have for a startup? I hadn't done sales. I hadn't done graphic design. I hadn't done other kinds of marketing. I hadn't done any kind of like website building, but I had done sales type roles. I had done copy for my classes. I had done some form of marketing when I had made sites for like entrepreneurship classes and built decks. So I was thinking, okay, I actually have more to contribute for a startup. Although we were at a small company and it was only me and my boss at the start, I thought that one of the greatest value adds that VFA offers is that my roommate was a VFA fellow. My friends were VFA fellows, and we worked at an incubator where I could go to lunch with other VFA fellows. So although I had a different company from them, I felt like they were also my coworkers. So that's a huge value add that maybe some of you won't realize, that in creating that sense of community and culture, VFA startups in those clusters, in those cities, because we're all friends with each other, or we're at least friends with a lot of the other VFA fellows. It's like having coworkers at different companies. It's really cool.
Thank you for sharing that story, Alvaro. And I want to come back to you because I would define your role as like a jack of all trades. And like that's very common with a smaller company. So I want to talk about like how you articulated your skill set to get a job there. But Manisha, back to you. When you were pitching yourself, whether it was in the essay or match, how did you demonstrate your thinking and your impact to be qualified and for them to take a chance on you?
That's a good question. I think a few things. Number one, I talked about experiences in the past where I had engaged in like deep problem solving. So I did have a few internships that were actually marketing internships. And I talked a lot about areas in which I was able to like identify a problem, analyze the situation, and like offer a solution to my team. And I think that that was like pretty demonstrative of the way I thought. I also did this in relation to like extracurricular activities that I did in college. I led like the social justice program at the community organization I was volunteering with. So I talked a lot about designing the syllabus and the material that was required for that sort of education. And I think that those two, like, it was not necessarily what I talked about, it was more of like the way I was able to spell out how I thought through things that I think was more valuable for them. Another aspect is, and this might be true or might not be true for some of you, depending on how the company's interview process is, but I had to go through like a role play technical interview per se. I had to complete a task that I would have had to do on the job. And to be honest, like when I got it, it was use this software to redesign this aspect of our website so we can see how you did it. I'd like never used that tool before. Like I had never really like done tactical design, but that was the opportunity where I was like, okay, like I only have a week, but I'm going to learn as much as I possibly can and show them that I'm a fast learner. And they knew that I didn't know what I was doing. They just wanted to see how I would handle the situation. And I think that's like another piece of advice I would say is that if you come across like a technical interview where they're asking you to complete a task that you're not familiar with, like take it as an opportunity, do the best you can, and then explain to them, like, I think just be honest with, okay, like I didn't have that much experience, but like this is what I was able to accomplish while also not knowing how to use the tool 100%. And I think that's a great way to also demonstrate your critical thinking.
Thanks for sharing that. And Alvaro, back to you. It seems like your experience translated well into your industry. Talk a little bit about that. You know, I know that oftentimes we might have like internship experience in sales that might translate directly into sales. But let's talk about work experiences that translate into industry knowledge.
Yeah. So having worked in government, I was working at a city, the city of Miami previously. And in that, we had been doing work with the Kauffman Foundation and the Knight Foundation to develop entrepreneurship in the city of Miami. And I was trying to acquire, as part of my as part of my job duties, was being able to acquire a big incubator to come to Miami and communicating with them. And after I had done that, I didn't know, because we didn't have a set term for that, because it wasn't a typical or likely role in that venture, and that had been a side thing that I had done. I didn't know what to call that. And so working with VFA fellows, when I was doing the application process, I realized when I walked through the process, they were like, oh, that's business development. And so I was like, oh, okay, so I have experience in business development. And the same thing goes, I had written out reports that documented what we did at the city. And I would write in my resume, oh, I've built reports. No, you wrote copy. Oh, okay, I'm a copywriter. And so in those kinds of things, I think it's great to talk about what you did in your previous roles with people that had more of a private sector experience, for those of you coming from a nonprofit sector, or for those of you that worked in a type of role that was more general, walking through with someone that better understands an industry so that they can better give you terms for exactly what your skills are, because they may understand better than you do.
I love that, Alvaro, how you teamed up with some current fellows to work on your application. And should you not know a fellow, an excellent way to think about the roles is a webinar that we have called Getting a Startup Job with VFA. We talk about match and we break down all the industries as well as all the roles so that you can think about, oh, just like Alvaro, I was developing business opportunities and I was writing copy. So in my follow-up to you all tomorrow, I'm going to send you a link to our webinar recordings. And I highly recommend you watch that one if you're struggling with match role industry. It will be very helpful. One more question to you all, Manisha and Alvaro, generally, before I get to Q&A. So we have some questions that came in here around the impact of the pandemic on the VFA experience. One question was, will we know if training camp is virtual or in-person selection day? Let's go in order. All selection days for the class of 2021 are virtual. We had our first selection day on Friday, went really well, had over 100 students there from across the country. The remaining selection days will all be virtual, even if we get a vaccine by the election. All right, like we're going virtual for the rest of the year. Training camp is to be determined. So in December, it's likely that the VFA leadership team will make a call on VFA programming nationally for the year of 2021, or at least the first half of the year. So as of right now, you should expect your selection days and your training camp to be virtual, because pretty much every other part of your life is virtual as well. And we're gonna prioritize the wellness of the Venture for America community at large before anything else. The promise to your class by the Venture for America board is to have additional in-person events to make up for the fact that you have not got the in-person time that other VFA classes have had. So that's a promise from the VFA board to finance that in a different way. On a similar subject, Alvaro, back to you. How has the pandemic impacted the day in the life of Alvaro?
So for my VFA company role, I was doing a lot of in-person meetings and convening stakeholders in community where they were. So I would be driving 2 hours south. So I had to do a lot less driving, which is good. But what I had to figure out is how could I communicate to them in the same way doing virtual, and that was an obstacle that I had to learn, but it also gave us the opportunity to reflect and think about what our value add was. And in the process of the pandemic, we actually pivoted in a lot of our ads. We decided to develop our own impact fund. So we actually completely shifted gears from being a third party connector to being someone that was directly enabling economic development in the state of Alabama. That wouldn't have happened if not for the COVID-19 epidemic. And I was at the forefront of that because my boss was at his wit's end because he had so much planning, and I was like coming in with such fresh eyes. And for me, I had less of an ownership stake in the venture that I could come to him with ideas, and it didn't seem like he wouldn't feel like he was completely freaking out, because actually I gave him something that for him felt like a way out. So that was directly in my role. It allowed me to rethink what we were doing at our company. But in my life, VFA did a great job of connecting us with each other and convening us in a like happy hour on every Friday. So I was still able to see a lot of the fellows that I was friends with. And then once things normalized a little more in Alabama, we were able to see each other in a responsible way. But I would not have had that had I been anywhere else, where a lot of my friends that are in banking won't be able to go back to the office or see a lot of their coworkers for 9 months.
How about you, Manisha? Where are you calling from, and where do you usually work?
Yeah, so as I said before, my company is based in Cleveland, and that's where I was living for the past 2 years, but I am currently in California with my family, quarantining here with them. In terms of work, things are definitely different in terms of when I work. I start my day at 6 a.m. as opposed to 9 a.m. Back on the East Coast, so that's an adjustment I've definitely have to work with. My company was already half remote before the pandemic. We would work from home 3 out of the 5 days of the week. So I think in that sense, we transitioned pretty easily, but definitely heavier reliance on Slack, heavier reliance on just like offline communication as well. Like I get a lot of texts when I would never get that before. And then also, of course, Zoom meetings instead of in-person meetings. We kind of have a rule where we try to keep every Zoom meeting under 45 minutes. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But one thing I've definitely noticed is that after the pandemic has started, our meetings tend to get on the longer end versus the shorter end. So that's something that we're trying to actively combat. And then in terms of, I think, the fellowship itself, so I technically graduated the fellowship in August, but I still like stay very involved because I think that the fellowship community was really important for me. Every single fellowship city has a leadership council that coordinates activities, and they do a really, really good job essentially planning like virtual events, making sure everyone has ways to like stay connected. I got to meet the fellows that just joined in the 2020 class recently. So there's still online opportunities for me to stay connected even though I'm still far away.
Appreciate y'all sharing that. And in the next 11 minutes, we're gonna try to rip through these questions. I got 23 here, and you've seen me over here to the side. I haven't been ignoring you. I've been trying to group them together. So let me rip through some of these. I'm also gonna pass the ball to Alvaro and Manisha, and we're gonna try to get these done before we get to our housekeeping. So we had some questions around background before VFA. It does not matter what school you went to. It does not matter what your major is. All time, we've had more than 200 different schools that VFA fellows have come from. We've also had more than 200 different majors. What matters is your story. And if you're the first one to come from your school, I would recommend reaching out to somebody who you find on the VFA website who was the first person to come from their school. That could be a part of your story, okay? Major doesn't matter. No one's gonna ask you, it's very unlikely in the interview process, they're gonna be like, what did you major in? They're gonna ask you what your impact was in the organizations, the clubs, the business internships and volunteer opportunities that you've had. School is like this bit of a measure of how well you're gonna do on a job. Doesn't matter what you study. If someone asked a question about a portfolio, I think a portfolio is always a value add. You know, obviously with like people in technical roles, it's nice to be able to show your work. I think people that are going into sales, marketing, copywriting, like Alvaro was saying, imagine presenting them with a portfolio of your work, right? Rather than just telling them your impact, you could show them your impact. So a portfolio is always a value add. Someone asked how long the fellowship is and if it varies by company. No, it's 2 years long. So in order to be eligible for the benefits that comes with being an alum, you gotta finish your 2 years. All right? Alvaro, this question's coming for you, my man. I'm interested in starting my own business one day. Right now, though, with all of this uncertainty in the world, I'd like to have a more stable, regular job. This way, I can build up profit and job experience for my ideas. Is VFA a good fit for me? Go.
Yeah, I think VFA is a great fit. I mean, in the background of all the government stuff, I was much like everyone else, like wanting to build something and building things on the side that I could build with the $500 or $200 that I had. So like I did everything from e-commerce sites to every clothing type of company that I could build onto a website. And so in doing that, I also thought that I needed that job security. And the cool thing that VFA provides is that it gives you all the skills that you need, and you're in such close proximity to people that have started things from scratch and took huge leaps that you just like while talking to them. I mean, it's kind of like when you're listening to how I built this, but you get to meet the people that are actually the guests on how I built this. Like I got super close to my boss, and I just realized he was a normal person who was freaking out when he decided to leave his job at a law firm to start a company with no guaranteed salary or anything, just because he believed that it was a huge value add to the world. And so I think one of the things that you'll get from VFA is being able to talk to the people that have taken those risks and realize that they were as unprepared as you think, or they're way more unprepared than you would think someone would be. I mean, ideally, we'd all start businesses when we're most equipped to start them, but that's just simply not the case. So I think that's something that VFA forward every single one of you.
Thank you for that. Manisha, coming back to you. Do you ever feel like you gave up on your dreams of becoming a full-time musician by pursuing VFA and going into a different industry entirely?
I would say not at all. I think like here's the thing that I've learned about creative industries and also just creativity in general. Like creativity requires two things. One, it requires expansive, non-judgmental thinking that allows you to create. I feel like I had like really like gotten to a great place with that when I graduated. The second part of it was you need to be super disciplined and super organized, and also be okay with taking risks. And that was not something that I was comfortable with right out of college. And I think that this is why Venture for America was such a good fit for me, because it actually, I think, helped me get closer to my goals of being, I mean, the things that I wanted to do related to being a musician was I really wanted to have ownership of the things that I created. And I tell this to anyone who has asked me this question before, is being a musician, being an artist, like all of these things, like we're creators, and creators, one of the biggest things that you have to deal with is ownership of your work. And there is no better way to learn that than to work in like a completely different industry and get that perspective somewhere else. I think also with Venture for America, you're with like-minded individuals that are doing completely different things. Like every single one of the fellows like in my city are working in different industries, they're in different roles, and they also come from different backgrounds. Like they're all, like not all of them wanted to be an entrepreneur and joined VFA. A lot of them just was looking for their first job out of college, but it was a mindset that I think that was similar. And I think if you surround yourself around people who are like that, it could only help you become like a stronger creator, a stronger musician, etc. I know that that's been true for me. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks for sharing that, Manisha. You know, there's a lot of questions here around the essays. And y'all are kind of verging on like going to the professor and like asking what's on the test. I want you all to take a deep breath and remember that I showed you the answers in this presentation, okay? When I say tell a story, I don't mean that it needs to be published in a book. I mean, talk about what's important to you. VFA is not just applying to a job, right? We've talked about mission. We've talked about program. I've given you the criteria that we look for. I don't want you to like analyze all of that and like try to put all of that into an essay. Talk about the parts that are in this presentation that are most important to you. If you have a specific goal, if you have a specific role that you're passionate about, talk about how VFA can be a stepping stone. There's no right or wrong answer, there's your story. So I'm not going to give you the answers because you already have the answer. There's a lot of questions around like length and where you need to submit your essays. I'm going to put that back on you all and tell you to follow directions. So whatever it tells you in terms of length and where to put answers, it's where you should put it. And that's how many characters and words you should have. There was an excellent question here about city. The point is, you don't have to tell us in your essays or even right now which cities you're passionate about, unless you're really passionate about a city, and then tell us why. The theme here that I'm getting at is that you want to move to a VFA city. I saw some Californias and some Washington, D.C.s in the channel when we talked about city. I love those cities as well. I'd love to work in them and live in them. You can't do that through VFA. So the point is to focus on why you are open or excited about moving to a VFA city. That's enough on essays. Y'all got it. Couple more questions. Can you go to grad school and be a VFA fellow? Manisha and Alvaro, raise your hand if you think you can do that. No way. No way. I would recommend you become a fellow and then you decide if you can do that. Working at any job is at least a 9 to 5. Startups usually push up against those boundaries. You're telling me you're gonna go to grad school and like have time to like hang with your friends, date somebody, call your mom, go to the gym, have a little fun on the weekends and explore your city. No way. Wellness is one of my favorite responses to like what I learned during my fellowship. 6 minutes left. Manisha and Alvaro, talk to me about your match experience. Were you pitching different cities, different industries, different roles? Were you flexible? Were you inflexible? What did you learn during match? 2 minutes each. Manisha.
Okay. Yeah, I changed my focus halfway through match. I studied computer science, so I thought I wanted to be a software engineer. I realized, I think, with the help of the VFA team and halfway through pitching, that was just not the focus that I wanted. So I ended up pivoting halfway and started pitching design and for product design related things. I didn't specify by industry. I was open to all industries. I feel like I don't know if this is true, but this is something that I felt, is that you either can be, I think, really specific on industry or really specific on role, but like you kind of can't have both. And I think if you have the choice, be specific more about the role than location. Like every single VFA city is excellent. You're going to have a great time no matter where you go.
I was kind of on the flip side of that. I only wanted to be in Miami because I'm originally from Miami and Miami's great. And I was only applying to startups in Miami. And at one point I had applied to every single startup that was on Match in Miami. But I also realized that for me, very important was like the mission of an organization. And I was flexible enough to take calls and to interview with companies that aligned with my mission, but were in places that I had never thought of living in. And so in that, I actually found the startup that I ended up at, purely because my boss was a great dude and what we were doing seemed really cool. And I could still get that early stage startup experience that I really wanted from VFA. And I went to Birmingham, Alabama for 3 hours, and I told my parents that I was leaving in a week, and I moved to Birmingham, Alabama, and it was great. Because as scary as it may be to move to cities that either you've heard bad things about, or maybe for Detroit, for instance, like I had heard that it was crime ridden and all these things, or maybe you had heard nothing about them. You didn't know anyone that had lived in Pittsburgh or anything. One of the biggest value adds about VFA, it's kind of like wherever you move, you'll have a built-in friend group, or at least a pool of people that you can find that are similar to you, and at least came from similar type schools, have similar ambitions, and also are probably really chill. So with that, it was a way easier transition than everyone thought that it would be for me, and that I thought it would be for me. So yeah.
Appreciate y'all sharing a bit about your match journey. And if there's one word I can recommend to the audience on match, it's to be flexible. VFA is not your magic hat. This is not Harry Potter. We cannot wave a wand and get you your role in your city with your industry preference. You're good to get at least one of those. Pretty good to get 2 of those if you cross your fingers. It's unlikely to get all 3. So it's important to think about what's most important with your preferences. We haven't even started talking about the diversity of a company. The leadership of a company, perhaps they're a serial entrepreneur. Perhaps that entrepreneur identifies like you. It could be a mentor for you. Alvaro was like the first hire at his company. I was employee number 40. Manisha's company, how many did you have? 10. Right? We haven't even talked about size. So there's a lot of preferences that you can put forth when thinking about match. And the number one piece of advice I can give you is to be flexible. A lot of questions that I didn't get to, but I want to get to a little bit of housekeeping before I let you all go. One, if you've got more questions, check out the recordings of our webinars. They answer a lot of what y'all are going or you're talking about. We sent you all a text on Monday with application tips. They're really tips. We're not trying to hide things from you all. Like, we're here to tell you what we're looking for, and I recommend you be yourself and tell your why in these essays. I'm gonna share my screen one more time on some final notes. So, we got through the Q&A. I hope you got what you wanted. If you did not, you can stay in touch and ask questions via the survey that I send out tomorrow, right? That comes directly from me. I'll respond to your questions if you have them. It's quite likely that I'll point you to a page on our website, part of our application toolkits, or our webinar, because I want you all to dig into this so you can convince yourself, your parents, your friends, and then VFA that VFA is the next best step for you. If you got questions related to your essay, selection@ventureforamerica.org is a great place to start. And your essays are due next Monday at 11:59 your time. So if you're on the West Coast, it might be 3 a.m. our time, but it's 11:59 your time. So I know we're at 6 o'clock Eastern and we have plenty of questions in here. I apologize that we could not get to them all, but I just want to say thank you to Manisha and Alvaro for volunteering an hour of your afternoons to give back to the VFA community. Riel, thanks for shadowing. If y'all tune in next month, Riel's going to be running the show on these webinars, so stay tuned. If you got any questions, I'm available. You want to be a part of my community, so I'm down to help you. I'm sure I speak on behalf of all the VFA fellows because once upon a time, somebody helped us as well. I hope you all take care. Thank you for your interest in VFA. I look forward to reading those essays next week. Have a good one.